Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach, author of the book, A Life to Die For, and co-author of the best-selling series, The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care. Today, we are embarking on episode number 178, and the title for today's episode is Kung Fu for the Soul. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? Well, you know, sovereignty is a natural born right to freedom and self-determination. Unfortunately, what commonly happens to most of us in the first few years of our lives is a process of education that actually undermines the sovereignty that we were born with. This process begins with our parents and our caregivers, and then becomes the domain of our teachers, ministers, law enforcement officials, government leaders, and other experts and authorities who claim to know more than we do. Because we care about our family, friends, and communities, most of us work hard to fit into this model of society. So we avoid making waves, and we try to just get along or go along, as it were, for the greater good. And then years later, many of us wake up to the fact that we don't really know who we are or why we're here. And maybe we become disillusioned or resentful or even angry about our lives. So clearly, sacrificing our true nature in order to live up to externally established standards doesn't serve us very well in the long run. While it's important for all of us to adhere to the laws of the land and honor the boundaries of other people as we go along, there's no reason for us to lose our true selves in the process. We owe it to ourselves to reclaim our birthright and step fully into our sovereignty. So this week, I've invited a spiritual Kung Fu warrior to join me. My guest has studied the way of Kung Fu and has brought the discipline of this martial art into the realm of spirituality. He trains people in spiritual Kung Fu warriorship, which helps them develop skills and strengths that increase the health, happiness, and safety of both themselves and the world around them. Please join me in welcoming a newcomer to Life Mastery TV, Accolon Hollingsworth. Come on there, Accolon. Looking forward to seeing your face here.
Oh. There we go. Hello.
Hi. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for today's conversation.
I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for the topic at hand and what you bring to the conversation as we go back and forth.
Right. That's great. Thank you. Well, you know, Accolon, most of the people that come onto my show all seem to have one thing in common. They all go through some kind of, or perhaps even more than one, challenging experience in their lives that leads them to want to bring some healing into the world. Now, I suspect something like that has happened for you too. I wonder if you'd like to share a little bit about your journey and how you got into this idea of spiritual Kung Fu warriorship.
All right. Well, my journey kind of was inverted from that. I learned the skills that help overcome pain and challenges and then applied them over the years. I've been through massive amounts of pain over the years and was glad to have what I was taught and what I teach to help me through all that stuff.
Right.
But where it started from, so I felt a calling as I was growing up. And when I was a child, I looked around the world I was seeing. So as a child, I'm looking around at the culture, society, and I'm learning from those places you just listed off, places of authority of how to be in the world, right?
Right.
School, family, community, etc., TV, movies, wherever the ideas come from. But I saw lots of dysfunction and pain. I saw people hurting themselves. I saw people hurting each other. And in my own home, there was some domestic violence and alcoholic stepdad, and there were things. But when I was a teenager, I was introduced to a Kung Fu teacher who was very unique. As I studied with him, he started talking about things like fighting with love, which is my friends in other martial arts schools. I never brought that back and said, hey, you know what I learned in my martial arts training was I learned how to fight with love. What the heck is that? So right. He started introducing me to more of a deeper level of spirituality in martial arts. And I eventually, I became his apprentice. I was an earnest student. In fact, check this out. He tested me. He gave me my first lesson, told me to practice for a year. And if I was still interested a year later, he'd give me my second lesson. He was wow. testing how earnest I was as a student. And I was a teenager at the time. So, 15 to 16. So I stretched a lot for that first year. I practiced the side kick, and I didn't have a lot to work with. There was a meditation stance, but I did it for a year. And then I counted down to the day, and I called him to the day a year later. And I said, I'm still interested. Will you teach me? Will you train me? He said, all right, come on down. And I continued to be earnest, and I was wanting to help the world be better for people. So he took me on as a live-in apprentice after a while. And once I graduated high school, and he trained me as a Kung Fu priest. And that training was the foundation for what I work with now. Right. After I graduated that training, I spent decades developing through experiential learning, the foundation I was given, applying it to the challenges of regular everyday life. And then, of course, my students as well. That developed into a self-care, self-mastery system that, and the spiritual Kung Fu warrior training. But over the years, so when I talk about applying all this, what I learned in that foundational training into everyday life and the challenges, and I mentioned pain and whatnot. I mean, there's regular life of the stress of making a living, working, buying a house, selling a house, getting married, starting a family, going through divorce, just regular everyday life.
Right.
But so many times going through the challenges and the pain, I felt I had an edge that most people don't have, where I was able to self-heal through the pain and get back quicker than most into being good, being able to generate enthusiasm, passion, joy, and outward into life and being in a good way. And that included with parenting. When I went through divorce, I had a 3-year-old child who needed me to show up and be loving dad.
Right.
While going through the strain, the stress, the heartbreak, all that. And I was able to. And so it's just plenty of times where I've been would be overwhelmed situations, stressful, even at times being on the verge of homelessness, and yet waking up in the morning, glad to be alive, feeling full of love, and being able to give that to my boy and the people throughout my day, and be in a good way. And so many times I felt, well, the situations I'm in, most people, when I hear them talking about being in similar situations, they're miserable, and I'm not miserable. I feel good, and I want people to feel as good as I do going through the tough stuff. But that all comes from those skills that I teach in spiritual Kung Fu warriorship.
Wow. Now that's quite an amazing story. There's a couple of points that you mentioned that I'd just like to kind of reflect on a little bit. The first one, the fact that you were a teenager, I think you said 15 or 16 years old, something like that.
Yeah, 15.
Yeah. So first of all, it's kind of hard to imagine in today's society, any teenager having that kind of, focus and dedication and as you called it, earnestness to, achieve a goal. There seems to be less and less of that kind of passion in the world, at least amongst the young people right now. And so I'm curious how you kept that going. What was it that drove you during that year to continue practicing and become an expert at that one move so that you could go back to your teacher and say, okay, I am ready now for my next lesson? Just tell me a little bit about that process.
Well, it was a couple things. One, when he gave me my first lesson, he showed me examples from different systems and styles that I could learn. And I thought, ooh, I want to learn that. That looks exciting. That's thrilling. I want to learn that. And then we started the lesson, and it was, here's a sidekick, here's a meditation stance. And I thought, well, what about all that other stuff? It looks so cool. I want to do that. I wanted to hang in there to learn that stuff, but also there was something different about him, that there was a depth. When that man listened to you, he was fully present. And there was this sense in his demeanor that under the surface, there's a lot to learn, a lot of spiritual sense to him. And I wanted to delve into, well, what is that? There's spiritual here. And I wanted to, you know, I could have gone to other martial arts schools. I had friends that were in other schools. And in fact, at one point, in order to continue training with my teacher, I had to move across the country because he went and stayed with his parents. It was a month visit. His dad heat stroked out mowing the lawn, so he just stayed there. So I had to join him to continue training. Right. And I had friends saying, well, we got Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area. We got martial arts all over the place. Why do you have to move across the country? You know, come train with us. And I talked about, I gave an example. I said, here's what the example I gave. I said, when I was introduced to sparring, which is practice fighting, right? Putting with a partner, the different maneuvers into context, back and forth. Well, I actually cried. There was a block, an inner block that I was bumping into. There was something in me growing up when I would wrestle with my friends. It was hard sometimes to wrestle, even to be fun, but there was an all or nothing with me. I had trouble with the in between, and I didn't want to hurt anybody. And so here I am sparring, and you know, getting hitting back, and I'm hitting that wall. And so I cried. I looked at my teacher, and I thought I was about to get shamed. And he looked at me and he nodded encouragingly. He smiled and he said, "That's okay. Keep going. That's what we're here for." Right. And there was a break.
He recognized you coming up against that block.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so when I moved across the country to resume my training with him, when he lived with his parents to take care of them in their old age, I got to have the in-depth work with. So he taught me how to help other people the way he had been helping me as a kid or as a teenager. And by the way, that when he worked with me as a teenager, training me, a phenomenal thing happened that more of us need. We cleared my childhood hurts, so I didn't carry them into adulthood.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's very, very important. Yeah.
And so when I trained with him, and I received the Kung Fu priest training, he taught me how to help people in that way, how to work through triggers to where the trigger isn't, it diminishes, and then it's not there. You don't, the buttons that you can press, they get pressed and you're fine still.
Yep, that's right.
That was pretty cool. That was part of the training, and just a lot of how to work with people on multiple levels, mentally, emotionally, etc., but helping them with their inner world. Well, when I graduated in a full-fledged teacher, and then it was my turn to work with people in that capacity. And then going forward into my life, all the challenges I had, it was applications where the magic kept happening. And what I learned kept holding water. And then I kept developing it further through experiential learning. And one thing that really surfaced experientially was the strength of soul that I had been developing.
Right.
And that's where we're, today's episode, Kung Fu for the Soul. That soul strength has served so many times to face the world confidently and to heal emotional pain and to get through the tough stuff in life. That's the cornerstone emphasis of the martial arts that I practice and teach. Sure, there's the physical, how to block a punch in a street fight, but as my teacher, taught me there's more to self-defense than blocking a punch in a street fight.
Sure, sure. This is great, and I've always been fascinated with martial arts. I did do 1 year. I did 1 year of judo, and the only reason I stopped was because I got a hernia and I wasn't able to continue. So, but I loved doing judo. It was so fun, and yeah, learning more about controlling my body. And I mean, it wasn't very much of a spiritual effort in that day for me, but I can see how it would have been had I continued. And the other thing is, you're mentioning, as you're talking about all this stuff, I remember, I don't know if you've seen the series on Netflix called Ip Man Volume 1, 2, and 3. The story of Bruce Lee's teacher and some of the things that he did in, I guess it was in Hong Kong. An amazing story, and he was quite an amazing man, apparently.
Oh yeah, he's a legend for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the series.
Yeah.
But he did a lot for leadership in the world and protecting people.
Right. Now, when you mentioned earlier on, I mean, 10 minutes ago by now, I think, you mentioned fight with love.
Yeah.
And the way Ip Man was portrayed, that's precisely what I saw. Here was a guy who would only fight as a last resort. And he was always trying to, bring love and peace and joy into the conversation. But if people weren't going to listen to that, then he was ready to take them on. And he was just amazing. So, and I think not too many people are going to put those two words together, fight with love. They sound like a contradiction in terms. But I resonate with that because I've had people describe me as a man with fierce love. Not fight necessarily, but fierce. And I get that. And it's true, man. I get pretty intense sometimes, but it's always coming from a place of love. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, when my teacher introduced that concept to me, he said himself, it's a hard concept. It takes a while. And I didn't understand it right away. I worked with it for a long time, and progressively it made sense.
Right.
Of course, the more my teacher put time into teaching that to me, it made sense. But even just experientially, I'll give an example that may help with understanding the concept, fight with love. So I was teaching an 11-year-old boy and this concept, and we have one of the self-defense sayings or goals we have in my school, in my teacher's school, was to help the assister into neutrality, help the attacker into neutrality, assist the attacker into neutrality, which is helping them out of their aggression.
Yeah.
Right? Well, fighting with love assists with that. Now, I was teaching this concept to an 11-year-old boy, which for an 11-year-old boy, that's a harder concept than maybe someone who's older, right? And I told it to him this way. I said, so if a man attacks someone, because and odds are they're suffering in some way, and they're acting out that suffering onto people.
Absolutely.
If when defending ourselves, we break that man's leg and he can't work and he's more financially stressed, is he going to be suffering more with the broken leg and not being able to work, or less? Well, of course, suffering more. Well, if he's suffering more, is he more likely to act out that suffering onto others?
What great awareness.
Well, I'm so impressed with that student because the next week he came for training and he told me this story of he was in 7th grade and there was a 9th grade bully that was bullying 2 of his friends. And he said he thought about what I had taught him about that scenario. And he thought about, well, how can this kid be suffering, this bully? Well, his parents are going through a divorce. So what he did was he went up to that bully, made friends with him, was sympathetic that that boy's family was breaking up. And then that boy decided not to bully. I mean, he hadn't started bullying my student, but he probably would have been next. But he never bullied my student, and he stopped bullying his 2 friends.
Yeah, that's nice.
I'm impressed that an 11-year-old 20-year-old student had such a quick turnaround in applying that.
Isn't it amazing how far the tool of compassion can go?
Yeah.
You know, and that's really what I think we're talking about here is compassion. You know, when I first started this program, the Life Mastery TV program, my partner at the time his name was Tommy Stoffel, and he used to say stuff very similar to what you were talking about. He said, "What I like to practice," this is what he said, "what I like to practice is when someone is throwing darts of aggression at me, usually just through verbal stuff." He said, "What I try to do is I try to imagine myself turning them into flowers and sending them back." This is precisely what you're talking about here. Taking someone else's aggression and transforming it into something that can benefit the world. You know, taking that energy and making it from a negative into a positive. And I think, you know, one of the martial arts that I've heard about is Aikido. And it seems that that's precisely what they do. If someone is aggressive, they don't really go out of their way to try and hurt the person. They just try to take that person's momentum and energy and redirect it in a different way so it doesn't do any harm. Mm-hmm. And of course, they have some pretty interesting ways of, you know, disabling somebody, but without breaking bones or anything like that. So this is a beautiful conversation. I really, really like it, and I'm glad that we're talking about this.
Well, there's a balancing point to this where with fighting with love and that situation with my student to the bully at his school, how the person responds is up to them. They may not be receptive.
Right.
It's worth the try. But then had the bully decided to not be receptive and had just acted out the suffering and kept bullying and bullied my student, it'd be okay to defend himself also.
Of course. Yeah, and as we've been saying, you know, you only use as much force as is necessary to stop the attack. You don't have to necessarily kill the person or break bones or do anything like that. You just want to disable him and make sure he understands that you're in charge. You're not taking this crap, and, you know, get him to channel his energy in a different way that's going to be more conducive to personal growth. You know.
Yeah. Well, first off, in order to train, my teacher was very adamant that we didn't go hurt the public with what we learned, right?
Of course.
And we were to never be the aggressor. But I had to swear an oath that if I could walk away, I would. And that's because we want to make things better, not worse. So, and when in physically self-defense, defending ourselves, there is the just enough. And one of the reasons I appreciated learning from my teacher was his emphasis on de-escalation. And I saw my peers going into martial arts and with the idea of learning more skills, becoming more proficient so they could be more, as they would say, badass and do more damage. And I was learning the opposite. The way I was taught and teach is we work to increase our proficiency in our skill so that we can end a fight without anybody getting hurt. The ideal is that the attack doesn't happen. The next best ideal is it's resolved without anybody getting hurt.
Right.
And you do the best you can toward that goal. But I was attacked in a parking lot, and there was other people involved that were responding different ways. There was there was a domestic violence going on that spilled out. It started in the bar, apparently. I was walking to the adjacent, I was just going to my car. I wasn't even at that bar. I was trying to get to my car in the parking ramp, but this aggression was happening in my way, right? And there was there's a man, a woman, the woman's friend. They had their dramas going on back and forth. And I'm listening, what do I need to do here? Because it's not always what you automatically think. If I got to rush in, charge, be the rescuer, it's what really do I need to do here that for the best for everyone involved. And at one point there was the man and the two women went into the ramp, the parking ramp. And then they came back. It was weird. I don't know why. They came back out with, there was a crowd of people. There was that surrounded this guy. I don't know what happened out of sight when they left my view, but they came back in front of the entrance to the ramp, and the people surrounded this guy. And from the very first time I saw him, and I spiritually felt into what was going on with him. So there's a man who's suffering. He's in pain, has never learned how to heal that and how to make him relieve his suffering. But he's got big muscles and he knows how to hit, and that's all he's learned. But I also could tell he wanted to be left alone. As soon as I read into him, what came to mind was the sense of a cornered tiger. That if you leave the tiger alone, it's going to leave you alone. But if you keep backing it into the corner, it's going to lash out at you. And so I kept having the sense, this guy, the best thing to do is leave this guy alone and let him go his own way and calm down and de-escalate. But he got surrounded, and that amped him up more. So he's on, everyone around me is a threat mode. So he punched one guy, knocked him down to the ground, and then another guy, and then another guy, and then everybody ran. And I'm watching this, and the field's cleared, except he sees me, and I'm at a bit of a distance. So he runs up to me. And I'm thinking, don't let him hit you, it's gonna hurt. I didn't think any, I'm a kung fu teacher, I'm skilled, I have all these years of experience, I can whoop this guy, and none of the bravado, right? It was, don't let him hurt, don't let him hit you, because it's gonna hurt if he does. But I also, there's something in the training of no escape, where it's with a threat or a challenge, you don't try to flee or escape, you face it with all of your energy and your strength and tact to do whatever you need to do. Now, I'm not saying that means you can't physically run away ever. But if your way is blocked and you can't leave. Anyway, so he ran up.
You became the tiger in the corner, so to speak.
Yeah. So the tiger ran out of his corner and put me in the corner, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but I consolidated my energy. I wasn't mentally trying to escape. I was fully present with what was happening. That's the no escape. And I wasn't intimidated. So he stopped short. We were face to face, and he stopped. He was going to flail punches at me, and he stopped because he didn't know what to make of. I didn't run like the other people. What is it? And then I went into, fight with love, right? So I said, hey, we don't need to fight. It's okay. He took that as weakness. Then he wasn't unsure. It's like, oh, he could. He took it as like I'm afraid of him, so please don't fight. It's okay. That wasn't the case. It was, so he's throwing punches, and I don't let any of them land. So that's where you can attempt to fight with love. The person isn't always going to be receptive. And then if you need to defend yourself, you defend yourself. But I was doing just enough. The whole time I'm thinking just enough to not get hurt. I'm not trying to hurt this guy either. So if he was going to escalate, I'd have to match what, but if I didn't have to hit him, I wasn't going to. And the punches come and none of them land. I don't even know what I do. A friend of mine who oddly enough had been in training with me once upon a time, and he'd been out of it for years, but he was watching from a distance to see what I would do. Great, thanks. But he said, yeah, there's a flurry of punches, and you just kept moving them aside. But when he couldn't get the punches in, he grabbed hold of me by the throat with both hands. And I just turned him aside and threw him into a bush. And I'm still, even when he's, got his throttling me, I'm thinking just enough. That was the phrase in my mind, just enough for defense, just enough. So I turn him aside, and he goes into the bush, and he comes back out. He bounces back up pretty quickly with another punch. And so he's pressing the attack, and I sorry, I'm talking with my hands here, but But I parry and then I'm going to counter strike. There's an elbow that's coming up, but we get separated right then by, I think it was his cousin. I'm not sure, but separated us because his friend wasn't winning. And then as soon as we got separated, my attacker walked away, right? That, again, my sense proved accurate. He just, if he was left alone, if he wasn't threatened, he would go lick his wounds or whatever, just move out of he'd de-escalate. The police came then and he got arrested, but I didn't. And part of self-defense, by the way, is being aware, like I said, you don't want to just jump right in rescue situation, just dive right in. You don't know who else is around. You got to be aware of that. Of course. Yeah. You can get surprised. And as I did, right? I mean, I hadn't seen that guy the entire time. I was aware of my surroundings. So he must have been in the parking ramp. I don't know, but all of a sudden there he is. But got separated. Thankfully, he didn't have any weapon. He just pushed us aside. Right. Yeah. So I got lucky with that. But check this out. Remember, so I was not wanting to add to this guy's suffering. And I also wasn't going to let him hurt me. I wasn't going to, be the martyr in that situation either. But and I'm trying to have neither of us hurt. Well, when he was in the back of the squad car, he was yelling, "I'm sorry," over and over to me. He felt bad. I could tell. He was sorry. And he hadn't been taught how to handle any of this better. He was a man who was suffering and had learned how to heal his pain. I didn't add to it. But we can really go easily into justification in a situation like that, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's what the ego does, right?
Right.
Yeah. The ego will gladly go into fight mode and attack mode and be completely justified in its own mind to do it. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Well, so in
an amazing story. I'm just curious. So this fellow that got arrested, and did you ever see him again after that, or?
No, and I was in Rochester. I wasn't in my hometown or anything.
I see.
I was 3 hours away from home. I was visiting. So a friend of mine, his son was in the Mayo Clinic for tests and some treatments, and I went down to help my friend de-stress a little bit. So I took him out to dinner, and then there was this thing that happened on the way back to the car. So I wasn't where I wasn't going to see him again. I'm not from that area. But the theme of my Kung Fu priest training was overcoming the spiritual sickness that is plaguing humanity, that is driving dysfunction and suffering.
Right.
And so,
well, before you go there, I just wanted to, we will come back to that topic. That's a really important topic. And yes, I want to get into that. But I just wanted to say something about this experience that you just described, because the way you describe it, you obviously had some level of personal awareness and situational awareness that a lot of people lose when they get stuck in situations like that. When their fear comes up, then the ego mind starts to activate and they start looking at how they can, attack to hurt the enemy and get rid of the enemy or whatever. So what I'm really impressed with is how you were able to keep that part of you in check and possibly like right out of the picture and keep your soul present the whole time. And so you were able to connect to that man's soul and be able to detect what you thought was going on for him. I mean, you didn't necessarily identify what the suffering was, but you knew that there was some pain there. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful part of the story and something that I think we can all learn if we give ourselves a chance to elevate the awareness and to quiet the ego mind, go into meditation, do whatever you can to quiet that ego mind so that you can increase your awareness of your soul and the presence of your soul. And so I think that's what I just wanted to bring attention to, that because that's what really was resonating for me right now. And so I suspect that that's probably what your whole Kung Fu priest training was about, was to get you to that stage.
Yes. And I applied it in that situation. And as a spiritual Kung Fu warrior, I lead my self-leadership is led from my soul. I've sure got a body, a heart, love center, ego, mind. I've got different aspects that as a team, that's my self-mastery, the team of that. And they work together, these components of myself. But the soul is in the main lead. And strength of soul. So I've strengthened my soul, partly with the insight of, okay, there's the spiritual sickness, and I'm going to counteract it rather than be controlled by it and manipulated by it or tricked by it. So in that situation that I just described, my goal is always this backdrop in my viewing the world.
Right.
Is spiritual sickness involved somehow? And if so, how can I help heal it? How can I make it better rather than worse?
Right.
And that is foremost in my making choices with my thoughts and actions and relating to what's happening around me. So that is in charge before the ego gets involved. The ego is subordinate to that.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, most people on the planet have it backwards. They let their ego run the show, and the soul just gets kind of pushed into the distance. And I think that might be the spiritual sickness that you're talking about. Even though once we allow our spirit to come into play and become the master of our lives rather than the slave of the ego, the soul doesn't really seem sick at all. It seems very healthy and alive and just wants to be doing what it was meant to do, which is to fully express itself. And so this brings us to the topic of there's lots of different things we can talk about right now, but I want to talk first a little bit about helping people relieve stress and anxiety, because that's something that it sounds like you've been talking about that kind of on the periphery. And certainly you saw some stress and anxiety or symptoms of stress and anxiety showing up in that man in that example that you gave. And I'm sure you've seen it elsewhere as well. So how does your process help people deal with stress and anxiety?
Well, actually, I'll tie in my answer to what we were just talking about with the ego, actually, both at the same time here. The ego, when the ego feels secure, a lot of stress and anxiety is just gone when the ego feels secure. Now, the ego can thrive and be wonderful and not be all the problematic stuff we notice the ego can cause. When it's secure and by following the soul's leadership, the ego can rest into the soul, follow the soul's directions. When the ego is rest into the soul, there is comfort. There is soothingness. There is a reassurance, especially when you've made your soul strong.
Beautiful. Yeah, I like that.
So that eliminates a lot of anxiety and stress, that dynamic at its core. If you can get to that, you've eliminated the majority of panic and stress and anxiety. And then what's left is manageable with your soul strength. Right. So I help people and I encourage people to take care of their ego and do so by letting the ego give up its control to try to be okay. The ego goes into control because it wants to be secure. So It tries to secure through controlling. But if instead of that mode, of that approach, if the ego rests into your soul, it will find comfort and the insecurities go away. When your soul is backing up your ego and your ego feels secure with that support from your soul, then there's a self-acceptance, even in the face of rejection from others, of all the myriad ways that we can wonder, am I physically fit enough? Do I look a certain way to be acceptable? Am I speaking right to be accepted? Any of this stuff, am I good enough? All of that. it's not in play as a problem to solve anymore.
Right. See, that's really nice. That's a very interesting way of putting it. The way you talk about letting the ego feel secure, soothing the ego, that sounds like a loving approach, right? And that's what I'm saying. This is something that I've heard. I've heard many teachers say, you've got to quiet the ego, you've got to kill the ego, you got to control the ego. I mean, it's absurd. You're just applying violence to some part of yourself that all it's trying to do is keep you safe from things that it imagines are going to damage you. That's what the ego does. So what I have tried to tell people and say, look, why don't you try loving your ego? Listen to it as if it were a little child. Treat it like a little child and just listen, like you're the loving parent. Hold it in your arms and say, yeah, sounds like you're really upset about something. Let's just see if we can work through this. I mean, I try to do that with my own inner child, my ego mind, which sounds an awful lot like a what do you call it? A 2-year-old child that's out of control with some kind of a temper tantrum. Often just listening and trying to understand what the ego mind's upset about is enough to get it to quiet on its own. Once you do that, that's a form of love right there. Listening with a desire to understand is a form of love. And it's all about compassion. That's what we talked about before. So it's beautiful. I like this idea. And as you do that, as you quiet the ego mind, then guess what? The soul just automatically kind of emerges like air bubbles up to the surface of the ocean, and you get to express that side of yourself. It's a beautiful, beautiful process. And all it requires is a little bit of maturity and willingness to love.
Nice segue with bringing up maturity, because that's what I was about to speak to. There's a neat effect when the ego follows the soul's leadership, you can think of it as a mentoring relationship, but the ego actually matures. The ego matures. So right. A lot of the problematic with the ego is immature ego. I mean, exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember being in junior high, it was a different reality of ego at the immature stage, right? But the ego matures, and all the more so when following the soul's leadership. And in terms of stress, anxiety, etc., I'll say a couple of things here with that. The mind is always asking this question, am I okay? Or the ego is asking this question, am I okay? Mm-hmm. And to determine, am I going to freak out or not? And there's, when the ego is determining okay or not okay, it's a different experience and a different answer usually than if the soul is determining. If you're asking the soul, am I okay or not okay? So when I get triggered by something or stressed by something, where I could worry, and when I ask myself, am I okay? When I ask that question, if I go into my ego responding to it or reacting to it, I find out I'm not okay, and then I'll see all the reasons why I'm not or why I won't be. And when I shift and when I go into ask my soul, am I okay? What's my soul sense? And I feel my strength there.
That's right.
My soul strength reassures me, yes, I'm okay.
Right.
And the number one reason why I'm okay is because of this soul strength, and I will use it as needed.
Yeah, that's
and
beautiful.
Then when that happens, then the ego goes, oh yeah, I feel it. Like my ego that was spinning and worried goes, oh yeah, and shifts and aligns with the soul strength feeling of being okay. And then the ego calms down, the mind calms down, and then the soul leads in the thoughts and actions that are needed to make things the most enjoyable.
Right. That's great. By the way, I just wanted to remind the folks that are watching live right now, if you have comments or questions, or if you're resonating with what we're talking about, please feel free to write something in the chat. And if you have a question, we will do our best to answer for you. So the idea then, I think, Accolon, is just allowing space for the soul to speak, to be present. And then using the guidance of the soul to help make the ego more mature and more relaxed about how it deals with things. I mean, that's a beautiful metaphor that you've put together, and I suspect that's, you talked about self-mastery earlier. I think that might be some of the ingredients of achieving self-mastery that you were talking about. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Now, one thing that helps to be able to do that is practice resting into yourself. There's such a, we're oriented for the most part as a society lately to be spoon-fed what to think about by screens and entertainment and et cetera from the outward world.
Correct.
And if we can take a break from that and not from receiving from the constant input and just rest into our own self. And if you start the day with this, it's a really good practice for getting ready for the day. But rest into oneself. And you do that, the more you do it, you make a practice of it, you become stronger at it. And now as far as the soul strength,
do you have an actual step-by-step process that people can follow in order, because when you say to rest into yourself, I'm not 100% sure I know what you mean. If you've got a little process that you can share with us, that would be great. It's
great to clarify that. I can see there being easy to misunderstand what I'm saying or not be sure I get that sometimes. What the heck is Accolon talking about? I go on. It helps to have reference points for people. But I don't have a several step process. It's more of a one step of just shift. Where do you shift to? So it's, my focus, is it outward or inward? So your focus being inward and focusing on your own experience. Now we can do this in terms of initially more relatable perhaps with our body. We tune into our body. Are there aches and pains in the body to be aware of, or is there postural distortion to be aware of, a balance concern, whatever, by focusing on the body, which is a layer of tuning inward. But when you take that deeper in to your inner experience, there'll be your heart love center, there'll be your ego, there'll be your mind, there'll be your soul, your essence. And when you just orient into the direction of inward, rest into. So sometimes it's as simple as you start with just rest into yourself, and then you fine tune it progressively. But it's just an inward, just where are you receiving the information and your sense of being? I'm just talking about from inside yourself. And that's,
so it sounds like there's a kind of, when you say an inner focus, the way I interpret that, it means to let go of any thoughts about the past because they're not serving you. You're not in the past, you're here right now. And if you're worried about stuff that's going to happen in the future, let that go too. And just kind of focus in on what is happening within your body or within your presence, within your essence right now. And just kind of focus on that and notice. And as you said, this is a beautiful thing. And something I learned from Eckhart Tolle is that in that place, in that moment, in this right here, right now, there are no problems. There is only what is. There's just this moment. Problems are simply products of mentalization, if you like, thinking about things and creating illusions out of something that doesn't even really exist. And so if you can eliminate the focus on past and future, then what you can do is you can stay present in the moment. You can feel into what's going on in your body. You can feel into what's happening in your heart and in your soul, and just simply love that. Just love it. Bring all the love into it, the love and the light and the beauty and the joy that comes with it.
And there is a focus. So I don't have a 4-step laid out step-by-step process, but what I will point you to, whoever's listening, is the emphasis being on putting the emphasis on what is your quality of being. because your quality of being is the most, affects your quality of experience the most.
Yeah.
And so what is, when you're checking in with what is your quality of being, you're checking in with your mind, your heart, your body, your ego, your soul, and you'll start to notice what you're doing with those parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And then what areas need help, what areas need strengthening, and maybe using your mind to realign. But that even happens just by, okay, focusing on your quality of being the best you can make it in that moment. That aligns your different aspects of yourself in a good way for being okay.
Right. Beautiful. So Sarah just wrote a comment here. She says, I can totally resonate with what you are sharing. I have a friend who is a fourth Dan karate. He managed a public house door team for a number of years, and it was the pub that had the least police callouts for problems, about 3 in 10 years. I believe most of the martial arts work with the ki or chi energy, the energy of love. I think that's what she's talking about. And by the way, in case you don't know what a public house is, I mean, Sarah is from Great Britain, and she lives somewhere in the southern part of the country, I believe. So public house, I believe, is a pub, you know, a drinking establishment. But anyway, so it sounds like, do you agree with that? That it's the ki or the chi energy is the energy of love?
Well, it's there. I'll give a qualified yes. There's more to that energy, but love is one of the qualities of that energy. I'll say it that way.
Sure. Well, especially since we talked about to fight with love at the beginning, you know, it's kind of tying things back together.
Yeah. Right. Well, and her friend, she's right, that the energy relating and probably the verbal as well of working the crowd to help influence the crowd to be in a good way. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of smoothing things over that could escalate or blow up that doesn't happen because of that kind of almost behind the scenes interacting. So yeah, it's very good of him.
Right. So the other thing that you were suggesting in the process of this settling into yourself, that's not the word you use, but that's what's coming to my mind right now. Resting in yourself. Yeah. This idea of finding that way of getting the soul and the ego to work together so that the ego becomes more mature and the soul becomes stronger in your life. I believe this is what you talk about when you refer to inner invincibility. Is that correct? Is that what we're talking about here? Or is it that it leads eventually to inner invincibility?
It leads to that inner invincibility, and that's a progressive experience. I'll give you this analogy. When people come to train at the physical self-defense aspect with me, early on, in the training, I get people very comfortable with a punch coming at them. I have some training drills that help people there's a punch that comes at them, and here's a way I have them practice varying ways of not getting hurt by a punch coming at them. And what happens in repetition is, so I got punched at and I'm okay. The punch came to my face, I was okay. Over and over and over. And eventually a punch coming at them is not something that's fearful to them.
Right.
Well, that they're okay. Because what they learn again is they're okay over and over and over again when that threat comes. And with the soul strengthening, when you rest into your soul and find comfort there over and over again, you feel stronger and stronger, and you feel you're okay even if you get hurt. Now there's more to this. I'm trying to keep the focus on soul strengthening, partly for leading into a big topic, and we only have so much time. there's heart mastery involved in this, in the inner invincibility with the love center, and having the heart not have any defensive barriers to try to be protected, but not walled off or shut down, but open and fully. And then the wellspring of love energy coming out of the heart has the healing effect. That's very powerful. And that's in tandem with the soul strengthening. But what I want to draw a contrast to is in terms of, are you okay or not okay? The general qualifier for that people go to is what's happening in the world, especially toward me, from the world, what I'm getting from the world. Am I okay based on that? Based on what the world is, what's happening in the world, and getting all security from that. Well, there's a lot of pain going on in the world. There's a lot of dysfunction going on in the world. There are people hurting themselves, people hurting each other. There's suffering, and it's not. I'm not saying that's all of life. There's a lot of wonderful and beauty in life. I'm just speaking of, there are these things of suffering, and there are things that feed insecurity and create insecure circumstances. And if we rely on the world to be okay, by making us being okay, by putting the importance on what we get from the world, what we get and don't get.
Right.
We have insecurity that's going to create more anxiety. It's going to create more fearfulness, more worry. But when, regardless of what is going on in the world around you, if you base your experience of being okay on your inner world experience, on your quality of being, making it that you're okay, and that's what you tap into for that feeling of being okay, you strengthen in the experience of that. So when you get triggered, or you get, there's a risk, a threat, or something pops up, something to feed insecurity, and your response is to rest inward into yourself, and all the way until you feel that wholeness at the core of your being. Each time you do that, you get stronger.
Beautiful, yeah.
And it gets easier and easier you can get to where in a heartbeat, you can go from being panicked or triggered or angry, upset, fearful. You can go right into,
I'm okay. Yeah.
My quality of being,
right?
What I'm doing with my being.
Yeah, I'm loving this, man. This is just such great stuff. I really appreciate, everything that you're sharing with us. And this is really all about what we're talking about, getting ourselves to that place of reclaiming our sovereignty, so that we can start showing up as fully expressed, fully experienced human beings who happen to be, having, or spiritual beings, I should say, who happen to be having a physical experience on this planet. It's beautiful.
Well, and think of, so there's kind of a paradigm going around of, I'll be a wonderful person as long as the world's wonderful. But if I get hurt, then it's my job to lash out.
Yeah, right.
And it's fair and it's justified because the world hurt me. Right. But then you lose out because you're suffering.
That's right.
And it's
trying to tell people, it's kind of like, it's kind of like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't help.
If you want to be okay and feel good, then use your sovereignty to make that choice for yourself. That's where sovereignty really matters. It isn't, well, if the world says it's possible to be happy and it's okay to be happy, then I will.
Yeah, right.
I mean, right now, there's a lot of discouragement going around with what's going on in the world with unrest, civil unrest, with racism, with government concerns, there's all these layers of problems and concerns and a lot of dysfunction throughout all of this, that in society, that if we're relying on society's permission or even optimism that it's possible to be happy and okay, right, if we're not going to get there. So with sovereignty, when we go, okay, in my soul, I have the sovereignty to choose that my quality of being is going to generate love. Therefore, I feel love and put it out in the world. I'm going to create an inner health for myself to enjoy that goes out to the world as I interact with people, with the world. That's soul sovereignty applied and powerful. It's, there's a lot of thought of humanity sucks right now. Humanity sucks. We're never going to get over our abuse culture. We're never going to have a healthy society. People can't be trusted. They're out for themselves. People are greedy, whatever. And we're only human. We can only do so good. Like, we got some decent qualities. We can be nice to each other sometimes, but usually selfishly motivated. So there isn't a whole lot better we can make this. Well, if that's the paradigm that you're encountering and choosing whether or not to do better and make better and create better and experience better, then you're cut off from a lot of wonderful. But if you take your sovereignty and you go, well, if the world around me is showing me that we're miserable and we're not going to do better than this, but I'm going to do better anyway. That's applied sovereignty. And that's what spiritual kung fu warriorship is about.
Yeah, that's right.
Create the inner health and strength in yourself, and then by your way of being and interacting with the world around you, you end up helping society be healthier and safer and more enjoyable. And then it reciprocates back to you. Then your environment is more easier for you to feel good in.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I think you're right. There is a general consensus amongst most of the mainstream media and everything else that people are pretty much despicable beings and don't deserve to even live on the planet. I mean, you and I both know that's 100% false. It's not true at all. And in fact, as you have experienced yourself, and as I know I have experienced, just tapping into my own love center, as you call it, and trying to express that as part of who I am, that has an impact. It elevates consciousness. It elevates love in the world, which means that the world itself is changing as a result of offering that in the world. And if I choose instead to stay in a fear-based thinking mode, then I actually push consciousness down and I push love out of the way. So what's my preference? What kind of world do I want to live in? That's really the question that I need to be asking myself, that we all need to ask ourselves. If we wish to have a world full of love, well, then let's start filling it up with love. We can do that individually. And the more of us who do it, the faster the love level will go up. And we will heal the world, and we will heal everybody in it just by doing that. So, Accolon, we've reached past our end time here. I'm really, really sorry. This has been such a great conversation, and it seems like this is the kind of thing that happens. We get going, we really get wound up and get all excited, and unfortunately, we have a time limit. So before I close out, I know you're itching to say something really deep and profound for the audience. So why don't you close out with some final words, and then I will do my final closing.
Okay, final words. At your core, you're whole. And just let yourself feel that, and you'll find your own wonderfulness. And then just by doing that, you'll make this world a better place.
Yeah, thank you. That is so true and so deep. Thank you, Accolon, for sharing that. And I want to thank you all for watching today's program. Remember, you can catch the recording for this show and for every other show that I do on my website at lifemasterytv.com, life-mastery-tv.com. I truly hope you enjoyed this presentation as much as we did. It was just really awesome and exciting. In a few hours, you'll probably receive an email from the Learn It Live platform asking you if you'd like to leave a review. And I respectfully request that you do leave a review, because it helps us to spread the word and keep these kinds of great programs going. So thank you, and I'll look forward to your review. And finally, I'm
going to say goodbye and let you finish, okay?
I'm sorry, what?
I'm just going to say my goodbye and then let you finish your show.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Don't go off the air yet, though.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll wait then. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just want to remind everybody to practice the life mastery mantra. It's something you can do every day, multiple times if you like, but it goes like this. It's real simple. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to wish you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey and say, see you next time. Bye-bye for now.